Just one spoon, nothing else moved. Back in 1985, I was pregnant with my second child. My husband, now ex, and I decided that we wanted to move from the city, back to the farm I grew up on and my parents still owned. Without much money, we went the cheapest route at the time and bought a used mobile home and set it up on the farm. Not long after we moved in, strange things began to occur. The home was small, so everything had a place and was always returned to that spot after being used. But, things would go missing for days at a time, and then show up in an obvious spot. The one incident that stands out in my mind was when one of the ex's motorcycle repair books went missing from its shelf in the broom closet. My daughter was 3 at the time and these books were far too high up for her to reach. I know I didn't move it. We turned the house upside down trying to find the book. It showed up a few days later on the living room coffee table. Other small things would take unscheduled mini vacations and then return from places unknown. Nothing ever scary or creepy, mostly just confusing. Other things happened like lights that we knew we turned off being on in the morning. Or something being moved, you'd set something down, turn around to pick it up again and it would be a foot away from the place it had just been. I never saw or heard it move, until one day I was talking on the phone in the kitchen. I was sitting at the kitchen table gabbing away with my friend. As I'm talking, I'm turned towards the kitchen counter and sink. I remember seeing dishes on the counter that I hadn't gotten around to washing yet. Some plates, cups, and silverware. All of a sudden one serving spoon shoots off the counter and lands at my feet. It came off there with some force behind it. Nothing else moved. If the spoon had fallen for whatever reason, it would have landed near the cabinets. It landed about 3 feet from the cabinets. I think I yelled "oh crap," or maybe something worse. LOL, I'm explaining to friend on the phone what just happened as I stood up to try to figure out what had just taken place. I still to this day don't know how that spoon flew that far and nothing else fell or even moved. I banged my fist on the counter and stomped my feet to try to get something else to at least fall. That was the only time in that house that I actually saw something moved by itself. A couple of years later we learned that a woman had been stabbed to death in the kitchen of that house by her husband. A night I'll never forget. One night I was asleep with my son next to me. I remember waking up in the middle of the night to go to the bathroom. When I walked back I repositioned myself back to bed when I shut my eyes. Not even 10 seconds with my eyes closed, I heard a loud and angry demon-sounding growl in my right ear. I jumped up out of bed and I started screaming because WTF was that right? I slept the lights on the rest of the night and bought myself a cross the next morning. Side note, I don't have any pets and maybe I was imagining shit, but prior to that incident for days I had been googling/researching shit on exorcisms. I took that growl as a sign to stop. I've had a similar experience I'll share. It's kinda long but bear with me. After I fell asleep I remember having nightmares about a certain room in my house that is essentially closed off due to it not having drywall. I remember dreaming about this room and it was fully finished and had furniture in it. I also seen a few people that I have never seen before. Then the nightmares started. I remember at one point I started hearing footsteps in the hallway which started getting louder. This is not a cat loud, we are talking human walking loud. I hear stuff in the house all the time, so this wasn't unusual. I don't remember if I was sleeping or awake, but I definitely wasn't fully awake either way. As I started hearing these footsteps getting closer I started trying to lift my head up to take a look, but I could not do so. I felt paralyzed and couldn't move but felt like my eyes were open. The position I was laying was on my back, one hand on my bed and my other hand was on my thigh. I remember trying to pinch myself because I couldn't do anything else, which pinching myself felt extremely hard, almost like I was fighting to do it. But I ended up pinching my thigh as the footsteps started to sound like they were in the room. Upon feeling like I was awakened, my body was actually able to move again, so I lifted my head almost in a freaking out manner. There was nothing there, but my cat was looking in the doorway. I was most definitely spooked out, but again this wasn't that unusual. I don't remember laying back down or falling back asleep after that, but I do remember having nightmares. I remember waking up on and off several times throughout the night, and each time I was sweating profusely like puddles of sweat. I remember my aunt that had passed being in the dream nightmare and me waking up saying something out loud, but I don't remember what was said. When the morning came and my alarm went off, I got up as usual and started my day. Didn't think anything of it and brushed it off as just having nightmares. Upon taking my morning piss, that's when I noticed a pinch mark on my thigh in the same area that I pinched myself when I thought I was dreaming. I've looked into lucid dreams and sleep paralysis, and I've read stories that people had both at the same time. But the fact that a day later I had a bruise where I had pinched myself. I felt like I was going crazy, had some high anxiety and could not grasp the fact that this happened, but it hasn't happened again, so I brushed it under the rug until I read this post. You're not alone, stay strong, but if you start getting hurt you need to reach out to a priest ASAP. My dad called me with a paranormal experience a few weeks ago. Just as he was falling asleep, he felt two hands on his chest jostle him as if to wake him up. As soon as he thought it was just a dream and rolled over, he had the same feeling happen again on his back. The only other person in the house was my mom sleeping next to him. I saw something freaky in my Unies basement. The basement was where my uni assigns the clubs to set base. I clearly remembered that this was on my first day of going to college. A friend from high school wanted to audition for the choir and he was a little embarrassed, so he dragged me along. Turns out non-auditionees aren't allowed to enter the club room, so I waited outside. Looking like a dork. The room next to the choir belonged to the dance club. There was an upperclassman blasting music while he sat by the door like he was some bouncer. I took the liberty of glancing inside the cramped room. They didn't have much, some chairs, student things and a clothes hanger looking shabby closet. Like they just hanged a pole between two walls and started hanging their costumes there, nothing really eye-catching except for a small pale hand that suddenly protruded from between the clothes. Jesus, did it make my eye bulge and my heart pounded so fast. I looked at the upperclassman and he looked at me, probably noticing how startled I looked. He shook his head, and told me, "Don't mind it," and blasted his music louder. The hand also slipped back in the closet. Like I said, it's just a pole they hang their clothes on. It wasn't really a closet, so there is no way I would have missed the fact that there was no feet standing below or person behind those clothes. Just a pale child's hand. I yeeted out of that place and left the doofus who's still doing auditions behind. My experience with a ghost paranormal. This story takes back about 2 years ago and it still sends chills up my spine. Keep in mind my room is on the second floor and opens up to the staircase to go downstairs. I used to play a lot of video games and would hardly ever come out of my room unless it meant getting water or food or using the restroom. One day my parents asked me if I wanted to go out with the family and grab something to eat, but I wasn't in the mood, so I said no and let everyone leave. Leaving me home alone. I was playing Call of Duty and after the game ended I was editing my class, so it was pretty quiet and I could only hear the small background music and my surroundings. It's been about 30 minutes later since everyone had left and I heard my little sisters talking downstairs and I was sitting there. It hit me that no one should be home, but I also thought that maybe they decided to stay back too. I was wondering why they decided to stay, so I got up and was gonna ask them why they stayed back. I put my mic and controller down and their voices got louder considering the fact that I didn't have a headset on. I opened my door to go downstairs and I heard them talking clear as day. Soon as I called out their names and asked why they stayed from the top of the staircase, the voices stopped. Confused on why they didn't answer me, I called out again and no response, so I went downstairs thinking they were ignoring me to see that no one was really home, so I ran outside to see no one there. And a silent outside. I refused to go back in and I stayed till my family came home. Bedside watcher. I am posting this seriously because I have no idea what was watching me. I was asleep last night around 1:30 a.m. and I remember I was dreaming of something very normal and typical but can't remember what it was. The problem though was that in the dream I kept catching glances of something out of the corner of my right eye like a fast-moving cloud of mist. It whooshed across my peripheral vision 3 times, leaving a trail. I remember feeling in the dream like something was to my right side. I could feel something there. I snapped awake and as I lay on my back I turned my head to the right towards the edge of the bed and damn it, I shrieked and lifted almost straight up and sideways to the middle of the bed because Looking right into my face inches away was something. Eyes looking right into mine, peering just above the bed, gray fingers curled onto the bed like it was peering over the edge of the bed at me. The eyes were big and not static. Moving eyes. I have no idea what it was, but it was there, and not only did I feel it there, I saw it there. Could my house be haunted? Obligatory apology for bad English due to it being my second language and blah blah blah. Okay, so let's just get some info on the house out of the way. My house was a school roughly 120 or so years ago here in a small town I will not name for obvious reasons. As far as I know, there has never been a death inside of the house, but a previous owner of the house died in a car accident after falling asleep at the wheel. So with some info out of the way, let's get to the point. So the experience I will be talking about here will be one that happened just some minutes ago. So I'm laying in bed about to go to sleep. I start to hear tapping on the wooden frame of the window, so I look over and see the blinds going back and forth hitting the frame, and so I thought nothing of it until I realized that there is no draft or wind and all the doors and windows are locked. Shack and I go up and around the house to see that one window or door that might be slightly open. After about half an hour of checking and rechecking everything and not finding anything, I go back to bed. When I reach my room, I noticed that the blinds have stopped. As I lay in bed, I jokingly whispered, "If there is any spirits here, make the blinds away back and forth to show me you are here." After a while I chuckled at my stupidity, and almost like 5 seconds after, I hear tap 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 tap. Freaked out, I quickly rolled in my bed to see the blinds saying back and forth back and forth. So I grabbed my phone and started recording. After thinking I got enough footage, I stopped recording, and just as I stopped recording, the swaying stopped as well. If anyone knows how I could upload the footage or for me to write about more experiences, then please tell me. Very long, haunted house in rural Brazil. Both of my parents come from a very small town in central Brazil. It is mostly a farming and mining region. The house where my mother grew up was built in the 1600s. It was the master's house of a large slave-run farm, with a little old church in front of it from the same period. Maybe to make up for all the slaves who must have suffered terribly in the house at the hands of my ancestors, my grandmother decided to use the house's kitchen, the main room in the house, as a place to take care of sick and poor people. My mom personally saw many people die in the house during her childhood. Fast forward to the early 1980s. Both of my parents had moved to Rio de Janeiro some decades prior, and I was now a 16-17-year-old painfully shy boy with undiagnosed autism, born and raised in a place where machismo ruled. Didn't have many friends growing up, didn't even begin to talk until my teenage years, and living in a house with 4 older sisters, I longed for some solitude anytime I could get any. When I heard my grandmother had moved in with one of her daughters, I asked her if I could spend my 3-month summer vacation on my own in the old house. She welcomed it. At first, one of my sisters came with me. The old church was under renovations, and all of the statues and paintings from it were in the room where she was staying. The statues were a bit spooky looking, with glass eyes that seemed to shine in the dark. The first few nights we had a few spooky moments, but nothing too bad. The space between the walls and the roof wasn't particularly well sealed, so owls and bats would get in and fly around over our heads. We mostly laughed at it. Then on the 3rd or 4th night, I woke up to the sound of my sister screaming. I ran to her room, opened the door, and saw her bed in the middle of the room, with all the spooky statues turned around facing it. She was on the first bus back to Rio the next morning. I was very scared as well, but decided to stay. This was my first chance to be on my own. And as a horny 16-17-year-old boy, I loved the attention I got from the local girls intrigued to spend time with the boy from the big city. During the next couple of months, a few small things happened here and there. One night while walking past the church, a dead cat fell from the roof right in front of me. It was badly mutilated, apparently from a cat fight, but I didn't hear anything. Cat fights are usually quite loud. I buried the little guy next to the church. On another night an owl landed at the foot of my bed, and it stood there for several minutes staring at me. I couldn't scare it away, but eventually it flew off. About a week before my departure, is when it all happened. A distant cousin of mine who was a huge guy with a bad temper, found out his younger brother was dealing drugs, and went berserk. As I walked past their house, their mom ran out screaming for help. She had blood on her hands. I ran in, and the younger brother was on the floor with his face all smashed in, while the big brother stood over him with a big knife. I managed to talk him into dropping the knife, and going for a walk with me. We stopped at a local grocery store, bought a few sandwiches and beers, then sat on a park bench to chat. We chatted for hours. Somehow I overcame my extreme shyness and desire to be alone, and actually listened to what was on his mind, while bringing in a few observations here and there to hopefully help him to think clearer. While we were chatting, a stray dog came and sat next to us, obviously eyeing some of our leftover sandwiches. We gave him what he wanted, and he stayed with us. At one point we decided to head back, and the dog came with us. Dropped my friend off by his house first, then walked home with the dog in tow. It felt good to have some company on my walk home anyway. I saw a goat jump over a wall and onto the street. I never heard of wild goats walking the streets, but there it was. The dog and I just ignored it, and kept on going on our way. As we approached the clearing in front of the church, the dog stopped and started to growl and step backwards. Something I couldn't see scared the hell out of him. I backed up, then went the longer way around toward the back of the house. As we walked out of the woods and onto the backyard area, the dog went fully berserk. It started to bark aggressively while pacing back and forth, keeping his eyes on the back door. Then it grabbed a stone on the ground and started to chew on it while still growling, with pieces of stone, teeth, and blood coming out of its mouth. Dog ran back into the woods in obvious distress, while I stood there pondering my next move. It was a very cold night, so I went in. Once back in the house my heart was racing, but nothing seemed unusual. I managed to calm down, and went to bed. Left the window next to me unlocked in case I needed to bail. A while later I heard some extremely heavy footsteps, and the old wooden floor creaking under whatever it was. I opened the bedroom door, and saw a horse walking past the living room towards the kitchen. Bats, cats, and owls? That I had no problem with. But how in the world did a horse get in? Opened the back door, and the horse walked out. I couldn't go back to bed. There was an old black and white TV in the living room, with an antenna attached to the top of a mango tree outside, and at night we could get signal from a small city not too far away. They were showing the 1973 movie The Horror at 37,000 feet. It is about a plane carrying some religious artifacts, and it becomes haunted. Too close to home for me. I stood up to turn off the TV, and that's when all hell broke loose. It felt like an earthquake. The house was shaking, all lights flickering, and all the critters running and flying around apparently freaking out as much as me. Ran into the bedroom, closed the door, got under the covers, and things went quiet. That's when I started to hear some very heavy breathing next to me. Popped my head out to look, and saw the wall inflating and deflating like the belly of a breathing animal. I remembered about the window, and jumped out. Badly sprained my foot, and nearly froze to death spending the rest of the night on a park bench. Next morning a couple of truckers helped me get back up through the unlocked window some 10 feet above the sidewalk. The wall still looked inflated, but there was no further activity. Spent another week or so in the house, and nothing unusual happened. Went back to the same house many times thereafter over the years, and again, nothing. Sometime in the early 90s I decided to ask my grandmother if she ever witnessed anything unusual in the house. She looked at me, smiled, then offered to cook me lunch. She died not long after that, and the house got demolished soon after. I never saw that dog again. Make sure to subscribe and hit that bell for notifications.